Hey, NL110, this is Ensign Alex Wong again here with Captain Blaney, and we're here today to talk about discipline. Sir, what is a good working definition of discipline?
I think discipline is pretty interesting in that, especially at a place like the Naval Academy, everyone thinks that midshipmen are disciplined. And we definitely think that part of life at the Naval Academy is about discipline. But I think most of us would have a difficult time actually assigning a definition to the word discipline or stating really clearly what the concept is all about. Um, so when I try to define it, I draw on psychologist Scott Peck, who was a clinical psychologist, and so spent a lot of times trying to help people overcome the different difficulties in their life. And so he kind of consolidated a concept of discipline that I think is really useful. Um, so what he talks about discipline as the series of skills that one needs to learn in order to overcome the difficulties in life. And in the process of overcoming the difficulties in life, the disciplines are fundamental to our ability to grow as individuals. So that's his kind of definition of discipline. I think in NL 110, we actually have a really good framework also to talk about discipline in a very holistic way. And that is that we talk about system one versus system two. And we've already spent time thinking about what are all the things going on below the veil of consciousness in system one. So I think a way to think about discipline is system two's control over system one. It's interesting, the word discipline actually comes from the Latin word for student, right? And so we've talked before about how kind of one of our goals for being people, for being intentional, is to have the ability to create our own habits, to decide who we're going to be intentionally. And so the skills of discipline, in some ways, are the skills that System 2 can use in order to train System 1. So to make System 1 the student of System 2. So Peck lays out four different skills of discipline. The first one is delayed gratification. The second one is taking responsibility. The third one is being committed to the truth. And the fourth one is balancing.
My understanding, Peck suggests these four basic disciplines enable us to focus and harness our pains and efforts towards growth and developing ourselves.
Yeah, that's something that Peck talks about, that life is at the very least fundamentally effortful, right? We can't just do nothing, right? So we're always doing things that are effortful. And if we're engaged in life, oftentimes life is painful. We experience setbacks. We don't get the things that we want. We lose things that are of great value to us. And he makes the point that pain without purpose is torture, but pain with purpose is life and growth, right? So the skills of discipline in some ways are ways to not only help us deal with the pain and effort of life, but to turn that pain and effort around so that it actually makes us more fully ourselves.
So for the first one, delayed gratification, it sounds like that idea is denying pleasure. How would you argue against that?
Yeah, so I don't think it's simply denying pleasure. Peck makes the point that delaying gratification is about scheduling your pleasure and your pain. And he makes a couple pretty insightful points about that. That number one, it's nice to have things that are pleasant that we're looking forward to, right? And so if we have something to look forward to the entire time that we're doing something that's more difficult or effortful or painful, then we've got that reward waiting for us in the end. So that's what Peck argues, is that in a lot of ways, having delayed gratification actually maximizes our overall pleasure, because as we move through life, we have pleasant things to look forward to. And then if you think about a meal, there's a reason that we eat our cake last and we don't eat our peas last, right? Because you kind of want to walk away from that meal with the taste of cake in your mouth, right? And so with delayed gratification, we're putting all the have tos first and putting most of the want tos last. And that way we maximize that pleasure.
Sir, can you explain what undisciplined discipline is?
Yeah, so undisciplined discipline is it's especially important for leaders and parents. Um, so if we're trying to discipline other people and teach them the right thing to do, undisciplined discipline is what happens. You know, if we have hypocrisy, right? So imagine this: you want your kids to be quiet, so you yell at them, or your kids are fighting with each other, so you spank them, right? So you're saying it's important to be quiet, and so I'm going to be loud. It's important to be peaceful, and therefore I'm going to be violent, right? So you send this mixed message, and it can be really, really destabilizing, especially to children and in a parenting situation, but lots of times it happens in leadership as well. Um, that not only do you communicate this mixed message so people aren't sure what the right message is, it actually kind of diminishes people's belief that the world is discernible, right? And so it just makes the world seem fundamentally chaotic. And the downside of that is if people really start believing that the world is chaotic, they stop trying to actually figure out the chaos and they just accept that the world is chaotic. So it's kind of a learned helplessness.
Sir, how about taking responsibility, the next discipline?
Yeah, taking responsibility is fascinating because usually, you know, having responsibility for things doesn't necessarily sound attractive. I mean, some people like to be the boss all the time, but you know, responsibility is almost always a weight. People talk about the weight of command. So if you're the commanding officer of a ship, the responsibility that you have for that ship, you might enjoy it. It might be the best thing you've ever done in your life. It's still going to be a weight. It's still going to tax you quite a bit. There's a weight of responsibility for being a parent as well. There's a lot of effort in having to take care of children, right? So we don't necessarily think of having responsibility as being a positive thing. One of the things that Pex points out is that if we actually take responsibility of things, then we have more of an opportunity to express ourselves in the world, right? So, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay. Peck,
Go ahead.
Peck describes two extremes with ineffective ways of taking responsibility. One is people who refuse to take responsibility altogether. And then there are people who, on the other side of the spectrum, take responsibility for things out of their control. Uh, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So he gives labels to each of those, right? So people who refuse to take any responsibility for themselves, he describes that as a character disorder, right? And so no matter what's going on in their life, they'll blame it on somebody else. He gives the example of a Marine in Okinawa who is kind of miserable, and so he keeps suggesting to the Marine, well, you could do this, right? Could you go fishing? And he'll always come up with a reason for why he can't go fishing or whatnot. So nothing in the world is in your control, and so once again, the world just seems chaotic and hopeless. So if you can't really have any impact, then you don't really feel a sense of efficacy in the world. And if you don't feel a sense of efficacy in the world, then it's kind of like you're in the middle of the ocean during a hurricane. You're just getting batted around by the waves, right? And that's not really pleasant for anybody. As opposed to, you know, if you're sailing a sailboat and you feel like you have the ability to drive in the direction that you want to go, right? So that's kind of the sense of people who take no responsibility in their life. In essence, they cut themselves off from the possibility of feeling like they're effective. On the other hand, people who take responsibility for things that actually aren't their responsibility, Peck describes as neurotic, right? And so, if you're neurotic, you know, for instance, other people's happiness. At the end of the day, you can't directly affect other people's happiness. You can engage them in the best way you know how, but everyone has free will. And so, at the end of the day, you can't take responsibility for somebody else's happiness because you can't ultimately direct it. And what's really destabilizing about that is that if you try to take responsibility for lots of things that you don't actually have responsibility for, then you'll feel very ineffective in the world. You'll feel very frustrated, at the world around you. So, kind of the sweet spot is discerning the things that you can control and the things that you can control, taking responsibility for. So, if you're familiar with Stoic philosophy, that's kind of the essence of Stoic philosophy. There are things in the world I can control and the things that I can't. So I need to control the things I can, which include my attitude, and let go of the things I can't, like weather and traffic and other people's opinions and their behavior.
It's about the purpose or the goal is to find that balance. Be disciplined. You would be disciplined once you find that balance of understanding what you can control, what you can't control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think we really need to be kind of hard on ourselves, right? Because we use language all the time. Um, you know, kind of pretending to ourselves that we're less responsible than we actually are. Um, and we talked about this in another podcast, but the idea that like I have to go to practice or I have to study for an exam, as if the world is forcing me to do these things. And in as much as I take on that perspective, then I feel like I'm a slave that somebody's making me do things, and that's not very pleasant, right? But if I recognize that if I'm at the Naval Academy, it's because I choose to be at the Naval Academy, and I could choose not to be at the Naval Academy. If I'm going to go to practice, it's because I choose to go to practice, and I could choose not to and be kicked off the team. That's my choice. I'm free to make that choice. I can study for an exam, or I can not study for an exam. And the beauty is that once we take the ownership of those decisions that we're making in life, um, it just changes the way that you experience it. You once you've made a decision and it's your choice, you feel free. And decisions that you make freely, I think you were much more engaged in following through and trying to be successful with.
So on our third element of discipline, dedication to truth, um, how would you explain this one?
Yeah, so this really is a discipline because it requires our constant attention and our willingness to question. So when we talked about system one, we talked about schemas and mental models and the way that the mind uses schemas and mental models to just construct our understanding of what's going on around us. And we also talked about the fact that mental models are models. All models are wrong, and some models are useful, right? And so this dedication to the truth is an understanding that every mental model that I have in my head is flawed, and so it probably ought to be up for interrogation. Um, it requires a lot less mental energy on my part to just take the things that I believe and the things I think I know and just stick with that and resist any type of change. But this discipline of being committed to the truth means that I have to be willing to interrogate all of the mental models that I have, to consider the possibility that I might be wrong, and do the work of constantly updating those mental models. And that really is a lot of work.
It could be painful to realize, to be exposed to the truth that might be something that you might not like.
That's absolutely true. A lot of the truths that we might have to confront are truths about ourselves. And so we talk about Peck. Peck is a clinical psychiatrist. Um, it's interesting. He talks about the courage and the strength that it needs to actually enter into therapy. People who are willing to come in and to look deeply into many of the things that they're probably insecure about, things that they're scared about themselves. It takes an enormous amount of courage to do that, and it's effortful and painful. And that's really what makes it a discipline. But you can also see, in as much as the disciplines are things that help us grow, right? Refining our picture of ourselves, refining our picture of the people around us, refining our picture of the world around us, um, is going to make us grow and make us more effective in the world.
On the last element of discipline, balancing, is that essentially understanding what you can do and things that you can't do, and finding a medium.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most essential things. Nowadays people talk about fear of missing out or FOMO, right? And so, especially in the world that we live in now, there's so much media exposure, right? That frankly, we're exposed on a daily basis to far more things than we could actually pursue in life, right? And so the discipline of balancing, a big part of it is recognizing that you can do almost anything, but you can't do everything. And so you're going to have to make hard choices in your life about what are the things that I'm going to do and what are the things that I'm not going to do. And this is difficult too, because there's a real sense of loss. A lot of things that we don't have time to do are good things, that we would enjoy doing. And so it's not like we're not losing anything by giving those things up. But we do have to make hard decisions about what we're going to. When you chose to come to the Naval Academy, right? There's lots of other colleges that you could go to, right? And it seems ludicrous to think about trying to go to multiple colleges at the same time, right? But if you look at your day, I bet you're doing things that are similar to that. You're pursuing more things likely than you can actually pursue successfully. And so part of the discipline of balancing is making those hard choices, committing to the things that you're going to do and doing them excellently, and being willing to let go of the other things.
Is there a strategy to deciding on what to do, what to not do?
Well, I think you have to follow your values. You really just have to ask yourself what matters the most to yourself. I think if you're asking yourself the question, what are the most important things for me? If you're making a list of these are the things that are most important, you've almost won the battle. I think the real problem is that people never ask the question. People never actually have the discipline to make an ordered list of what's most important to them. Have people, write a list of goals and then order them in numbers, and that is really, really difficult to do. People will resist it and say, well, like these 5 are all equally important. And that's not that might be a fine thing to do as long as you can legitimately do all of those 5 things. But I think nowadays what we're more prone to do is to have, okay, these 5 are all equally the most important thing, and then these 15 things are all, they're not as important as that one, but I have to do those ones as well. And so we just fundamentally lead an unbalanced life, trying to pursue more things than we can legitimately accomplish. And yeah.
So we should strive to respond to the world rather than react to things that happen to us.
Yeah, definitely responding to the world versus reacting, being intentional, right? So making decisions with system 2, what is it that you're going to accomplish? How are you going to accomplish it? And being intentional about that, right? So this class is preparing to lead, right? And the fundamental thing that you have to be able to do is actually lead yourself. That's a great context, right? So think about that. Think about if you have a boss, right, who's coming to you and saying, all right, we need to do these 15 things, and you only have time to do 5 of them. That boss would really, really frustrate you. And yet at the same time, as our own boss, we do that to ourselves all the time.
Wow. Well, sir, that wraps up our 4 elements of discipline. Thank you for your time, and join us in our next episode.
So there's one more thing on discipline that I want to hit, and from the delayed gratification. Let me just spiel it out, and then you can
throw it in there.
Yeah.
Do you need like a probing question?
Let me just go, and then we'll figure out what the probing question is. So in general, I would argue that you can't have a self without self-control, right? That I think being a person, having a self is intentional, and so you can't have a self and be a person unless you're doing it on purpose, and you can't do it on purpose unless you have self-control. And so I would define self-control as not doing things that you do want to do and doing things that you don't want to do. I think those are wrapped up in delayed gratification. That if I don't have this basic ability to have a desire and not do that desire because it's not in accordance with the person that I've defined myself to be, then I can't be that person, right? It's kind of critical to have that ability to delay or put off that gratification if it's not appropriate. And in the same way, there's going to be a lot of things that I don't want to do, right? I want to be a naval officer, but I don't want to study for this test or do this requirement or qualify or all of these other things, right? Well, if I've said that I want to be a naval officer and I need to earn my dolphins as a submariner in order to be a successful naval officer, then I'm going to have to study about how the ventilation system works and go get a checkout on it, even though I have no interest in really doing that. So that fundamental ability to do something that I don't want to do, I think is part of delayed gratification as well. And it's essential to being an intentional person.